So this is the outline that was in the invitation, just so you can keep track of where we are in the presentation. The first slide here is Revit implementation. This is when you're implementing Revit in your company, some of the things to know when you're first starting out. The thing to know is sometimes there's this idea that you buy Revit and then out of the box you're going to be able to do all of your calculations, your design. You click a button and your building's designed for you. And then you start getting into it and you realize that even before you can send your first project out the door, you've got all of this content that you've got to create. You've got to figure out what you're going to do with your details library. And then you'll usually want to set up a template, project starter, where a lot of these standards are kind of already set for the rest of your company to begin with. Here are some of the things to be aware of in Revit implementation, things that change, things that are different with respect to CAD in Revit. One thing you'll notice, especially on your first projects, is that your workflow is going to change a little bit. Usually there's an increased time spent up front modeling, getting things into the model. Where in CAD, you could throw a whole bunch of lines on your sheets, you could throw a lot of conceptual things out pretty quickly, where in Revit, every line represents something. Every line in there has parameters behind it, has a lot of information behind it that you have to put in while you're modeling it. So it takes a little bit of time to do that. Because of that, you'll notice that your DD phase, your design development phase of drawings, are usually lighter. What I mean by that is there's usually less work shown, and you spent more time doing it. Now that leads to another problem is, sometimes your clients, they might even have, say, set pay rates for each phase of the project. You might be spending 35% of your time doing the DD phase, and you're only getting 10% of the fee. So if they cancel the project at that time, something that they don't understand is they're saying, wait, you want either more money or you're taking more time to do, it looks like, less work on your sheets. And so there's kind of this disconnect that's only going to be solved through education. And it's also a little bit hard when you've got so many of your competitors willing to undercut you in your price and are willing to sign whatever agreement or whatever pay scale just to get the work. And then related to the CAD and the lines, there's been a shift of modelers versus drafters. In the past, you were able to just draw red lines, hand over a set of red lines to a drafter. They were able to, I don't want to say monkey see, monkey do, but you hand them these lines, you say what you see on the paper, put on the drawings, and you can, as long as the drafter knows how to match the lines, you're going to come out with a good set of drawings, even if they don't understand the building process or how things fit together. In Revit, what we're seeing is a shift where the modelers actually have to know a little bit about how buildings are constructed, how things connect, how maybe wall ratings or insulation ratings or things affect, not only how they're designed, but, energy calcs that maybe somebody else will be doing. There's a lot more to know, and some of the drafters have been making the transition very easily into this modeling role. But you might find in your company that there might have to be some staff changes as the shift goes to this modelers, where these modelers have to be a little bit more familiar with the industry, familiar with the building process. So an interesting shift that happens there. Another item that always comes up is details. Most companies have a very large detail library, and when you first start in Revit, usually what you're doing is you're importing those details into Revit. You're just importing from your CAD library. Sometimes you'll notice that line weights don't look the same, things don't plot the same. We do have some tips in that second handout I gave you. There's actually a section on importing from CAD to make sure that your Revit line weights are going to match your CAD colors and that kind of thing. So, something to look at as far as bringing those into Revit. And then further development, you might find yourself wanting to create a Revit database or a Revit, collection of details where you can drag it from the database or another Revit project to your current Revit project. Now, the end goal that we all like to get to, the ideal situation, is in Revit, instead of having these static details, you draw a wall, cut a section, it already knows which detail to put in there, it already knows, the annotations, already numbers it correctly and keeps it all straight. Now, if you've ever worked with Revit and tried to make that happen, you realize that there's a lot missing there that isn't quite there yet. But we will get into a little bit in the application programming interface where there are some things you can do to push Revit beyond what it does come out of the box. And then just another reminder, the CAD importing tips are in the reference material that we handed to you. Another item that comes up often is Excel. Now, how many of you guys use Excel for schedules or calculations or reports, anything like that? Okay, so just about everybody uses it. If you tried to get Excel into Revit, you might have already noticed that there's a few hang-ups there. Getting Excel into CAD, there's all sorts of different options. Sometimes it's linking the OLE objects where you can keep them updated and linked in the project. So in Revit you say, okay, well I'll just link it into CAD, and since Revit's compatible with CAD, then I'll just put the CAD into Revit, and then all your OLE links are broken, they don't work, they're not there, and you realize that there is a disconnect there. There are a couple options, and the option that we've done is to convert Excel to CAD line work. It's not an OLE link, and then link it to your project, because you can actually get CAD line work to come into Revit very well. But what we've done is we've written a program that keeps track of all of the Excel files that you've imported into a project, and so that when you want to update them, you just click the update button, and it will update all of your Excel files in your Revit file. So that it does keep that, when you make the updates in Excel, you'll be able to see those changes in Revit. Another option, which is an option that's already out there and it's free for download, there are scripts that can transfer data from Excel into a key schedule. If you're not familiar with key schedules, it's basically a schedule that's not necessarily tied to entities in your model. You can basically add as many rows or as many columns and just type data in there. It's kind of a, something where you can just type the information in there as opposed to having it linked to parameters of equipment. And what these scripts can do is they can actually, you'll see them working. They switch to Excel, copy a cell, come back to Revit, paste it in, copy, paste, back and forth, which is okay if you want to get a lot of data from one to the other, but if you're looking for formatting, it's not going to do your borders, it's not going to do your alignment of your text, the rotation of the text, it's not going to do a lot of that stuff that you can do either programmatically or another way. And just a note that you can also use the Revit API, the programming interface, if you want to link data directly to Excel or to Access for that matter, to use it in your Revit project. This slide is some basics to know. We're not going to go through each one, but I want you to look at this list and just, these are the kinds of things where you're helping out a Revit user and you go and you're like, well, didn't you know you could tag all not tagged, or didn't you know you could do this? And they're like, oh man, that would have saved me 6 hours. I've been sitting there clicking one by one by one. These are some things that you should be aware of what they are and either how you can implement them or how they can save you time. So take a look at that list, and if there's something that you don't know what it is and you want to spend time, you can circle it. We can talk about it after, or if you want to look it up on your own. But we're not going to spend too much time on that. Here are some general tips that are a little less readily apparent. Sometimes when you're working with a lot of team members and you're working with linked models, you'll have, say, for example, a structural model linked into your architectural model. And so people are moving things around, they're clicking on things. Sometimes they'll draw a box and they'll drag whatever they're wanting to drag 6 feet, and little did they know they just dragged a structural model 6 feet off of the architectural model. Now everybody who's using it is like, wait a minute, did our whole model move? Did the structural model move? What's going on? I've got everything's not lining up anymore. Is this a model update? What's going on? And of course the person that did it is like, oh, I don't even know how to do that. It wouldn't be me. Well, maybe it was them. There are some ways to get around that. If you are familiar with design options, you can put a linked model in a design option and make it not active. So they'll be able to see it, they'll be able to do things with it, but they won't even be able to click it, they won't be able to select it, they won't be able to do anything unless they activate that design option. So it's a very efficient way to take the control from some of the users and put it at a higher level so that people aren't accidentally dragging an entire model that affects all users. Another option that's popular is to put it on a work set that you own, or a setup crew or whoever owns and never relinquish. So that way they can still click on it if they want, but if they try to move it or modify it, they're going to get an error that says you don't have permission to modify this. So that's something that is an option. The second one here is related, where if you do have it in a work set or something and you want to avoid selecting when you're drawing a box around multiple elements. If you draw the box around multiple elements, a lot of times it'll select that linked background, and whatever you're trying to apply is going to try to apply it to that, and you might run into errors. If you select one item in your model first, and then you hold control and select the rest of the model, or the rest of the items, it will select items in your model without affecting the linked model, or without selecting it, as opposed to if you just drag the box from the beginning. So just a quick trick if that applies to what you're doing. Another item that sometimes goes unnoticed is finding elements by element ID. When you're working in Revit, if you ever do a clash report, or if you get errors, you get these errors that say, you know, element ID 254621 has become disassociated with host, or item 214215 it no longer determines the plane, or whatever. You're like, okay, that would be great if I knew what 21 whatever meant. You know, what is it supposed to mean? Well, if you copy down that element ID and you go to the Modify tab, now in 2011 it's actually been moved to the Manage tab, but there's something that says Select by ID. You can paste that ID in there. It will actually highlight that element and select it in the model. Even if you're on a different work set, or even if you're on a different level, you'll at least see a highlighted region around where it is, and then you can look at where its 3D location is, and you know, that kind of thing, to find it very quickly. So that's something that comes in handy a lot. One particular example, somebody had placed mechanical equipment one right on top of the other, and we were getting in, you know, reports that we have in some of our programs that would say, oh, you've got this thing that's either not connected or it's connected wrong, and they're like, well, how do I find it? They're trying to look for it. I'm like, oh, here's the element ID, paste it in there, and they realized it was one right on top of the other. They wouldn't have found it by just looking at the plans and scanning for this rogue piece of equipment. So that's something that comes in handy.